it weird now to be on the other side? Now you get to just coast and chill out.
I know. I'm actually really excited about it. But again, I never do in-person interviews.
Oh, okay. So this is like 2-in-1 then. You're on a podcast. It's not yours, so you don't have to worry about asking the questions. You get to just hang out and have fun.
Yeah, kind of refreshing. And I just get to hang out with a girlfriend and drink rosé. So like I am coasting.
Love it. This is my perfect Wednesday, honestly. If I could concoct my perfect Wednesday, it is exactly this.
It is right now.
Amazing. You guys, welcome back to Fun on Weekdays podcast. I'm your host, Jenna, and today my guest is Jordan Wessel / Canova.
Yes.
She's going through an identity crisis right now.
A big time.
The girl just got married, so she's like, what's my last name? So she is a former model, former Miss Arizona USA, right? Okay. And now she is a current host of More Than a Podcast.
Heck yeah.
So right before this episode, we actually recorded a podcast on her page, so go check it out. It's available on
Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts.
All things.
All the things.
Yeah, go listen to that. She was on the flip side of it asking me questions. So now it's my turn to put her in the hot seat.
Excited.
So Jordan, you recently moved to Austin not too long ago.
A year ago. I hit a year in December, which is crazy.
Oh, 1 year anniversary.
I know.
Do you still kind of feel like you're still so new to Austin?
So new. I feel like I'm starting to transition into feeling like it's home, but it's taken a long time. Whereas I'm kind of a nomad. I'm from Colorado. Then I moved to Arizona for college and lived there for a handful of years. Moved to New York, lived there for 4.5 years, back to Arizona, and now here. And I will say, with all of those different places that I've kind of bounced around to, Texas has taken me more time to actually feel like I'm at home.
Interesting.
Which is something that I've done a lot of thought about. But it's the first place that my now husband and I bought a house, had roots, whereas when we were in Arizona or when we were in New York, it was all temporary. We knew that we were temporarily living in apartment to apartment and kind of building this life for ourselves. And now here, it's like permanent. We have a house and a dog and responsibilities and careers, and planning roots is something that's very unfamiliar to me. So I think now, a year in, I'm finally like, wow, Austin's really cool. I'm also not in actual like downtown Austin. I'm in Round Rock. I'm in the burbs.
Okay.
So I am like
north a little bit.
Yes.
How far is that from here?
Like 35 minutes. It's not bad, but I'm a suburban dog mom. And that is an identity crisis for me.
I mean, honestly, that is like my goal in the next couple of years. So,
love it.
Live in my
Come
dream.
join me.
Yeah, who knows? I might.
Please.
Let me know what neighborhood you're in. I might be in the market for a house in the next couple of years.
Yes, please come on over.
Yeah. So you're a city girl.
I
Moved
am.
Suburban Austin, Texas.
Yes, it was quite the transition. And honestly, I think I would have stayed in New York for many, many, many more years.
Really?
If COVID didn't happen.
Okay. I think actually I have quite a few friends that lived in New York prior to COVID, and then after COVID they moved and they went like somewhere completely different. My friend Megan actually lived in New York City, and I lived there with her when I was in college. I did a study away there. And it's funny when you say when you're living somewhere temporarily, it's like you kind of jam pack everything into this one certain amount of time that you're there, whether it's like a couple months or a year or whatever, because you know that there's an end date.
Yeah.
But when you are living somewhere, when I moved here finally, because I had only ever lived in Austin for the summer, and it's like you have 2 months and then you're back to Ohio, back to reality. It is different because you don't have as much of a timeline to pack in all of these, activities and discovering new restaurants and all these things.
Yeah.
So it takes time and you're able to give yourself a little bit of a break.
Totally.
But anyways, back to New York. I'm like, I go on such long tangents. I drink a Celsius before this, so my heart is pounding, and we're drinking a rosé right now. I'm like, what kind of combination is this? It's doing something.
An upper, a downer. You're all over.
It's based on how I feel right now. It's definitely an upper. So yeah, prior to COVID, like a lot of my friends lived there, and then they all kind of went their own ways because the city just changed so much. So is that what brought you then to Austin?
Yeah. So like I said, we were in New York for about 4.5 years. When I booked a one-way ticket out to New York to try my shot at modeling. And thankfully, my now husband's dad had lived there. So I was a West Coast girl. I assumed that when somebody says that like we have plenty of space and like a house for you, I had no idea that I was rolling up to a brownstone in Brooklyn, and he rented one level of that brownstone. I kind of thought that like the house was ours. No. So we moved into a 1-bedroom apartment with my then boyfriend's dad and dog.
Wait, stop. Wait, a 1-bedroom
One
with
bedroom.
the dad?
Yes.
No, where's the dad sleeping?
God bless him, my now father-in-law. He slept on the couch the entire time.
Stop.
The best. He made so many sacrifices for us. He was also so excited for his son to finally be there, and I just kind of tagged along. But I like did a makeshift closet. I bought like a steel thing on Amazon and like built it in the middle of the room. Like it was an adventure.
I think most people in New York have a makeshift closet because there are few and far between closets in New York.
Yes.
Wait, so he was sleeping on the couch.
Sleeping on the couch.
How did that work? Were you guys just quiet? Like what?
You know,
I mean, that might be TMI.
No, I'm an open book. You know, it was non-existent at the time of trying to figure out like, why the hell are we here? What are we doing? And Brendan, my then boyfriend, was always just like, for whatever I got my mind set on. Okay. So when I decided, I'm like, I'm booking a 1-way ticket to New York because I want to try modeling. He's like, fantastic, I'm coming.
Oh, supportive.
And he's so supportive and so wonderful that he then was out there looking for a job, didn't really know what industry he wanted to go into. And meanwhile, I'm trying to go to all these different castings and having zero luck. Like no one was even giving me the time of day. So I got a bunch of these like secretarial jobs and was cleaning yoga mats at night and like just trying to make ends meet. And I finally got signed by an agency out there. So we got our own apartment and really started building this life that we loved and that we worked really hard to achieve. And finally, I'd say like 3.5 years into that, I booked my biggest fit client that would have more than tripled my income. And I was so excited about it.
And it was it more consistent too?
More consistent. Okay. And that's the thing. Fit modeling, people often think that means fitness modeling. Like I was modeling fitness clothes. And it's an industry that I didn't know existed until I was there. So I was mainly trying to do print modeling, which is the stuff in magazines and all that you see, and also commercials. But my most lucrative income was from fit modeling, where I would go in to a company. Let's say Victoria's Secret hired me to fit their bras on my body.
Is that somewhere that you actually did do fit modeling for?
Yep. Victoria's Secret was a huge client of mine.
You got the bombshell on.
Oh, yes. And it's funny because they all fit so differently. And Aerie became my most consistent client. So all of their size CD bras were fit off my boobs. So go check them out.
Okay.
And you basically give them feedback about like how it feels, how it fits, what you should change. And then they were seeing that their sales were spiking on their bras. So clearly I knew what I was doing. And that was, I think, my first client. So I clearly had no idea what I was doing and just kind of kept working with different companies to help expand their sizing. That was something I was really passionate about because typically fit models have always been kind of fitted from a traditionally like size 0 to 4 body. And at the time I was very much like a 6, 8, 10.
Okay.
And so I was helping them start fitting more on like a mid-size model. And so I booked this client. It was with JCPenney to do all of their swimwear. So every vendor that came in had to use me.
Oh my gosh, good old JCP.
Girl, I was about ready to cash in. I was hyped.
I think JCPenney's actually shut down in my hometown mall.
That's the thing. They like filed for bankruptcy, but they're still around and still doing well. So I'm unsure.
You literally can't get rid of them. They are immortal. You know what? Good for them, honestly.
And you know what? They pay well. So thank you, JCPenney. So I booked them. I'm at my first day. And I remember seeing on the news that morning, like that COVID was spreading.
So when you started modeling, I'm sorry to like cut you off.
You're good.
When was this? So you're living in New York when? Yeah.
So I moved in 2016. I moved on New Year's Eve of 2016.
Okay. And that's when you were living with your husband's father.
Yes.
And then when you finally got this like big break.
Yeah.
When was that?
5-6 months in.
Okay. All right.
So I was with him for a long time. Nothing was working.
Okay.
I remember coming back to Arizona to visit for the first time for, I believe it was Easter. And my sister ended up getting really sick and had this horrible outbreak of like hives and like almost boil type things all over her body, not understanding what it was. And she had a staph infection. So she was hospitalized for an extended period of time. Her lungs were collapsing. Like it was crazy. So thankfully I was in Arizona at the time, so I could really be there and be with my sister. And during that time, I was like, I don't think New York's for me. Like, I'm going to try LA.
Okay.
So she gets healthy. We drive out to LA. I meet with a couple of different agencies out there. And the head agent at Wilhelmina meets with me and says the only way that we'll sign you is if New York also agrees to sign you. Okay. So you can be bi-coastal. And I got signed the next day. And their first thing, they said, you have to go back to New York, trying to expand our curve division in New York. And that's where you'll fit.
Okay, before you move on, how does it feel for people to identify a size 6 or 8 as curve?
I've had such a trip with this because I think that the way that the modeling industry views a woman's body is very different than how society views a woman's body. I do think that they overlap a little bit, like just how Victoria's Secret created the standard of beauty for a lot of women, and a lot of women are comparing themselves to that. Whereas if you see somebody on the street that's a 6'8", you would never look at them and say that you are a curve woman or you are plus size. And it's also can be offensive to women that do want to consider themselves as curve or plus size when they are a size 18, 20, whatever it is. So it's this weird gray area. And when I started modeling, I was very much a straight size model. I was signed as a 00, which is a whole other thing. But once my body started transitioning back into like a size 6'8", is when the industry essentially just didn't know what to do with me anymore because I was so in between. Technically, curve starts at a size 12, 14. And since I was very much in that middle ground, I think the idea with Wilhelmina was that they were modeling kind of off of Iskra Lawrence. I don't know if you know.
Yes. Oh my God. Iskra is one of my good friends here in Austin.
She actually, shout out Iskra, she has changed so many bits and pieces of my journey.
Especially with Aerie too. She was like Aerie's first like curve model. I remember that was like the whole start of the Aerie Real campaign, literally her face. Yeah. And she's in Austin now too. Let me connect you with her.
She's amazing. I saw her at an event here a couple weeks ago. And I remember when I was modeling back in Arizona and very much struggling with my own self-confidence, she was one of the first women that I saw working that looked like me. She had my body type and she was killing it. And she actually is what inspired me to move out to New York to begin with. And I really wanted to stick to the fact that I believed there was going to be a niche for my body type and that I didn't need to conform. I didn't need to lose weight and I didn't need to gain weight. Where when I was with Wilhelmina, they put me on the curve board and they told me to stop walking so much, start eating more. I needed to gain weight. And
so you're like in this middle ground where it's either like you need to lose a lot of weight to identify here, you need to gain weight to be here. And how weird for you to even say like it's a niche, group when I'm pretty sure like the average American size woman is, I would have to do Googling, but I think it's like a size 8.
Size 8 to 12.
Yeah.
Is pretty
So
typical.
that is not a niche size at all. That is literally the standard average.
But something I've also realized through this is the modeling industry isn't trying to relate and sell to the average American woman. They want it to be aspirational.
Because they want to make you think that you, okay.
It's all part of this cycle. And that's why now, I mean, it's getting so much better. But when I was really starting modeling, 10 years ago, you weren't seeing somebody that was an in-between size model on anything. And even for curve women like Ashley Graham to really break the mold there and just start showcasing that there's all types of beauty. And I think that's what the modeling industry was aspiring for, but it was such a slow process. Yeah. So as they were encouraging me to gain weight, they said, in the meantime, we need you to pad to go to these castings.
What?
Literally, you put on foam pads underneath your clothes because they liked my face. My face was skinny enough, but they wanted my body to be larger.
So interesting. So do you think like this standard of your face has to look a certain way and your body has to fit a different vision? And that's like obviously not very realistic either, because if your face is slimmer, then your body is going to like match that.
Yep.
Typically.
And that's why you like really don't see pads on your knees. Literally. Like they were so funny. It almost looks like spandex. And then on the sides, there was these pads. So they would add inches to my overall.
What?
Yeah.
So what did that do for your self-confidence?
I struggled with this big time because when I had re-entered the modeling industry, I did it under the idea that I was not going to change my body again to be accepted. And the modeling industry and agents are so subjective that you can be beautiful in one person's eyes and hideous in the next person's eyes. So I really tried to build a foundation within myself to be confident. So when they asked me to pad, I kind of went through this whole like moral dilemma of...
As one would. I mean, you're being asked to make a sacrifice to your own values versus like make money to survive.
Exactly. And at the time I was broke off my ass. So I needed the money, but I just couldn't get there morally. And I remember they had asked me to do it, and I had showed up to a casting with these pads and felt so terrible about myself. And I still to this day believe that there is a beautiful size 10, 12, 14 model that should work that job. And there's also room for a 6'8" or a 2'4". Like there's so many different body types that should be represented. So I went to my agency. They had a meeting saying they wanted to send me to Germany because they thought I'd work the most in Germany. And
what was the reason for that?
Who knows? I guess they love blondes and blue eyes in Germany. I don't know. Ugh. And they just said, like, keep up with padding. And while I was there, I just said, I can't do it. Like, I'd rather not work and wait for the right opportunity.
So when you go to these castings, do the people there know that you're wearing padding, or do they think that it's your real body? Okay.
I think it depends on how in depth the casting is. Okay. Because for a lot of castings, you have to like strip down to your bra and underwear.
I was going to say, like, what happens? I mean, obviously you can't do like intimates or swim or shorts and like, you know.
It was all being fully covered, essentially. But even the one time that I did pad to show up to a casting, they didn't even give me the time of day. Like they didn't measure, they didn't do anything. They basically said I was wasting their time and they were wasting my time because I didn't fit the specs that the agency had made up my specs on my sheet that I did not. So they were like, okay, you're wasting our time. So when I had my meeting with them, I'm like, hey, like, I'm just not willing to do this.
Yeah.
I got a call from my mother agent in Arizona the following Monday and was like, I'm so sorry to tell you this. Like, I don't know how to, but they've terminated your 3-year contract.
Oh my God.
That was 3 months in. And given the only reason I qualified for my apartment, because the way that apartments in New York are, you have to qualify for like 4 times your income or something crazy. And luckily my boyfriend had a job that he could semi-qualify, but I needed to make up that difference. And the agency had written me a letter saying my projected income for that year. And luckily they took a chance and gave us the apartment because of that. I was dropped 3 months in. I couldn't afford my half of rent.
So you were dropped 3 months in and you signed for a 3-year contract. That is so wild. I don't know what I'm more thrown off by. I think I'm still stuck on the freaking padding thing. Like that is the weirdest fucking thing I've ever heard in my life. I'm just trying to picture it right now. Okay, I'll move on from the padding.
It's crazy.
So before we get into the apartment situation, you did mention that they lied about your specs. Is that still a common thing that happens where you say that you're taller or you're shorter than you are, or you're thinner or you're bigger than you are in order to fit a specific spec that these, you know, what are they called?
Like casting agents.
Casting agents are looking for. Is that still common in today's modeling industry?
Yes.
Okay.
There is so much that happens in the modeling industry that I'm finally comfortable talking about it now because I'm not relying on it for my sole source of income. Yeah. But I think that there's 2 ends of the spectrum. So when I first started modeling, your specs on there, they would measure you and they would try to go a little bit smaller. And it was always this like underlying, like, just do your best to like tone up, lose weight. Like the smaller you are, the more you'll work, the more valuable you are in this industry. So when I would go in for, they call it digitals. So you basically go in and it's bare face. They want to just get like a bare bone structure of you. It's in your bra and underwear. They do your measurements. They do all that. I would get so nervous and so worked up about these because you'd go in and they'd measure, and that's either they would say like, you got to lose weight and we're not pushing you until you do, or they'd be like, okay, just like, that's nice, but just like tone up a little bit. And it's, again, like, it depends on who the agent was, but it can be said in a nice way that can really make you feel like shit. So that was the first part of my modeling career. The second part of my modeling career was having these measurements be so much bigger than what my body was, that then it was this like total mind trip that it was like, why can't I just be
good enough as you are?
Yes. And even with fit modeling, like, you had to maintain those measurements solely because the client was basing their garments off of your body. And let's say if I did go in and I gained a lot of weight or I lost a lot of weight and they're still fitting on me, then the garment, when the average woman went to go buy it in the store would no longer fit properly. So I get the fit modeling aspect of it. For print commercial, there's so much pressure associated with it. And I think that's why, honestly, models are the most insecure people I've ever met. A lot of my dear friends love them to death, but you are being critiqued solely on your physical appearance, and it's a mind trip.
I mean, your entire income is based solely on how you look and your size.
And they don't care if you are that size in a healthy way. They're not caring about your longevity because the modeling industry is not about longevity. It was never designed for that. And now it's getting a little bit better, but typically at the age 30, it was like, well, you've aged out. And I'm 29 now. And I can notice such a shift in how often I'm working and how often I'm booking because I'm no longer 19 and I can't pass as a teenager anymore. So it's an interesting industry to say the least.
How weird to like try to it's like watching a Netflix movie and you know that the characters are actually like 30 in real life, but they're playing a 15-year-old. You're like, that's kind of fucked up.
Totally.
But also what you said too about, like your agents lying about your specs too. My mind instantly goes to like men lying about their height on Hinge or dating profiles. They're like, oh, I'm 6'2". No, you're not. You're actually 5'11". But this is just so much more detrimental to your mental health.
Totally.
Like that's just a little innocent fib, trying to get someone's attention, but this is like a career and that's not you lying about that. That's someone else making that lie for you.
That's how they're representing you.
So does that ever make you feel like your representation doesn't view you as good enough?
Always. Yes.
Okay.
And I think my mother agent, I've been very, very lucky that my mother agent in Arizona, it's called the Agency Arizona.
What does mother agent mean?
So mother agent is basically the first agency that you sign with that my head agent, Terry, gets to dictate when I get signed to any other agency in any other state. And she will always get a percentage of my income from any job that I do.
Is that standard?
So having a mother agent is basically, well, there's a lot of reasons why you would want to have one, but she essentially has been my saving grace because she's looked out for me, read all of my contracts,
that's great.
Made sure that I'm paid, made sure that I am treated like a human. Where when I went to New York, the first agency that I was with could give two shits about me as an individual. And then when I got picked up by the agency that I'm with now, State, there's just a different mentality, I think, when it comes to representing models on a larger scale in a major city, that they can support you as a human being and want the best for you. But at the end of the day, it's a business. And if you're booking consistently, they love you. If you're not, you don't hear from them all that often, or you get dropped, which I've been lucky enough that I worked so consistently when I lived there that I have been represented by them for a long period of time now. But that's another thing that these models are facing constantly is like, if you aren't making these changes, they're in full control to drop whenever they want to.
I consider all of you guys my friends, and some may even say my family. Aww. So I obviously have to tell you about the Macy's Friends and Family Sale from April 21st to April 30th. You get an additional 30% off of designers that rarely ever go on sale, such as DKNY and Calvin Klein, and 15% off your beauty favorites like MAC Cosmetics, Urban Decay, Marc Jacobs, and so many more. So check out the sale at Macys.com/FOW and use the code FRIEND at checkout. So speaking of the modeling industry, when it comes to other models, how is that kind of relationship? Is it competitive? Is it down? Or is it very supportive because you all understand you're going through similar struggles?
In my experience, so supportive.
Okay, good.
Let me rephrase that. I think it depends on the job again.
Yeah.
Because some of these jobs are like cattle calls. And again, people's livelihood is depending on whether or not they book this. But with the vast majority, I realize it's a lot of women coming from different cities, all trying to just make it as a model. They're all looking for friends and they're just trying to work. That the majority of the friends that I met in New York were all from the modeling industry. And actually, when I started my company I had a very distinct experience that made me want to do that. But the more I started diving into it, more than a model was something that came up because the stories that I was hearing from these women and the things that they were struggling with, I felt like resonated so much the same struggles my small town friends in Monument, Colorado were facing. But the gap there between like this aspirational woman that never has to struggle with any of her confidence issues versus the woman that just shot for Victoria's Secret that is at an all-time low with her confidence. How do I bridge that gap and like have them support each other? So I learned so much through the models that I was meeting out there. And it also really just helped me grow as a woman in general and realize that as much as I've always wanted to be a model and as much as I enjoyed it, I wanted to be able to give them a platform to deliver their message and not just be seen as a beautiful face.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that that is a misconception, is that models are, you know, just like a pretty face and there's nothing there, kind of airheaded party girls? Mm-hmm. When I think of a model, literally, I think that is what has been kind of fed to us, is these girls that like party all the time and then they go to shoots, like hungover and stuff.
And, you know, I
don't think so as much nowadays, but like growing up when we were younger, like, I'm trying to think of not America's Next Top Model, but like some of those older shows. And I'm like, holy shit, how did this pass? Like this would not pass in today's society.
Oh my gosh. So much, like I grew up on America's Next Top Model, and even some of like the treatment that you would see there, that like if that were to be televised now, you get insane backlash. But that is what's happening behind closed doors.
So it still exists. It's just not being shown as frequently.
Exactly.
So sad to know.
And they can be politically correct about it when they want to speak on it. But the things that are happening behind closed doors can be very unethical. And I really feel like I was kind of stepping into my own as being an older model. I say older by like when I was 26, 27, working out there, that I felt like I finally had a sense of who I was and what I stood for and what I was okay with and what I wasn't okay with. And I still felt like when I did speak up for myself, I had to fight to get my representation to also stick up for me. It was very much like we just slide behavior under the rug. Like if a client treated me poorly, it's like, just don't talk about it. Just show up and keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, which is such a horrible, toxic environment to work in. Whereas if you were in the corporate world and you were having an issue with an employer or, you know, a peer, and you go and report that to HR, like, and they just said, oh, too bad. Like, don't talk about it.
Right. There's no HR. There's nobody protecting these models. And that's something that I really started realizing, because I think that when you're desperate to just make it in the beginning, you can brush so much under the rug. You do anything. And you also, it's so normalized that some of this really fucked up behavior that's just happened over time is stuff that models have always dealt with, that you kind of just have to like ignore to an extent. And when I first got there, I remember being thrown off by that. I feel like I've always had like a very strong moral compass, that I'd be like, this doesn't feel right, but okay.
Yeah.
And then over time, when you're there, I have a very specific example. One of my last jobs, I got booked for a client that did very risque lingerie, and that's not how the job was marketed to me at all. And the casting that I showed up for, I was literally like casted and tried on like a muumuu and like gave them feedback. And I'm like, hey, I'll try on pajamas all day long and you pay me. Like, sick. Then I show up to this job and it's like modeling crotchless panties. And I'm like,
I was literally just going to say, was it like
literally? There's fit models for that.
No, I hate to laugh because that is like such a horrible experience. But
now looking back on it, I can be like, yeah,
I was going to say like the complete opposite, like most elaborate thing I could think of. And it was going to be crotchless,
literally
panties,
crotchless panties,
or like nipple
or bras
tassels
that don't have nipple anything. Like,
I hate my nipples. You will never find me wearing a nippleless bra.
Girl, me neither. I'm like, what? Why? So I remember showing up for this job and just being like, this is not for me. I just don't feel this was marketed properly. And I had gotten to a place in my career that, yes, I still wanted the money. I wanted to make as much money as I could.
Yes.
But luckily I was in a position where I could financially support myself without relying on this job.
Gotcha. Wait, one sec.
I'm laughing. Is that above or to the side?
I literally have
oh, girl, I feel like I could. I also never talk about this stuff.
No, this is so interesting. And I feel like
I never talk about it.
I mean, I'm so fascinated by everything that you've shared so far that I have a million other questions. And I just want to like get as many questions in as we possibly can while we still have our people here listening. So I'm sorry, I don't even know where we left off.
Crazy. So I show up to this job. They do the crotchless panty thing. And I also I carry myself as a very professional person. This was my career. And so when I show up and they like give me the garments that I'm trying on, I'm like, that's opposite than I thought.
Like, so where's the other half?
Right?
Whose dog ate this?
So for real. So and given like in that circumstance, you get to wear your own little like G-string, but when it comes to fit modeling, people are grabbing you and touching you in all kinds of ways, because from a very non-sexual way of them thinking about it, they're just trying to fit the garment to make sure that when it sells, it fits on the woman's body properly.
Yes.
But from my point of view, there's a woman's hand in my ass crack that I'm like, I didn't sign up for this. Like, when I woke up today, this is not the first thing that was on my
literally pulling
agenda.
a thread out of my butt crack.
Literally. And I'm like, this is a no for me. And also, I think that I have a kind of an interesting past too, that like, I'm very protective of who I allow to touch me and when. And for this specific job, even though the woman that was fitting me had no ill intent, I was just uncomfortable.
I was actually going to ask if that was something that has affected like your personal life with your boundaries of people like touching you.
You know, it hasn't. I think it's a double-edged thing, because with this experience in particular, I called my agent and was like, hey, you're going to have to find somebody else for this job.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, and given when you book a job, it's consistent. I'm there multiple times a week and you're getting paid by the hour. So again, it's a good income. And so I called her and just was like, hey, you know, I didn't like being touched in that way. And because of that, I would like to not be put out for jobs like this. Yeah. I'm sure there's other women that don't mind. Give the job to them. Yeah. But for me in particular, I don't want this. And I was met with so much bullying
because they were like,
this is your job. And I'm like, but it's not. Yes, I am a fit model, but I'm not signing up to be inappropriately touched every day and for it to be okay because this is my job, quote unquote. And I had an instance maybe 6 months prior to, no, probably like a year prior to that. One of my earlier jobs where I had gone into this company that was literally creating products for Speedo. Like, you've seen Speedos. Yeah. They're not sexy. That I'm like, sick job. Like, I'll get paid for this. It's easy. These one pieces, like, can't be that hard. So it was a job that was like 2 hours away from the city on the train. So get on my train, I get out there, and I'm in a boardroom of people. And to start off the fitting, this guy hands me this 2-piece triangle bikini that like hardly covers my nipples and is like super skimpy. This is Speedo.
This is not Speedo.
I'm confused because he wanted to like measure my body and get an idea of what my body looked like before putting anything else on. I'm like, feels strange.
Yeah, what?
But again, I was new. So I'm like, maybe this is what they do. I don't know. Yeah. And also, why is the only guy that's in the room the one that's girl when there's just like 3 women in this boardroom just looking at me? So as he's measuring, he literally sticks his hand inside the crotch of this, literally. And I'm like so beyond taken back.
What?
And I like physically went backwards and am trying to like assess the situation of like, there's other grown people here watching what just happened.
Yes.
And nobody's flinching. Like, this is just expected. So
how do you process that of like, I was just inappropriately
touched, and
versus this is a job, you know, when everyone around you is making it seem so normal, does that like play mind games with you to like gaslight you into thinking that it's like normal?
Totally. That's something I was struggling with, that like I had done a lot of swimwear fit stuff, and I can't say a lot, like I was newer into the industry, so I had a handful of other experiences and they were always very, very professional. If a seam needed to be moved inside somewhere, I was doing it. I was telling them how things felt instead of somebody
going in
and also a professional can also say like, hey, I just need to know like if that seam is okay. Do you mind just like letting me know if that's okay? Or if they go into like the top lining, hey, I have to touch this like top lining. Is it okay if I touch you?
Yeah.
Where then it's when somebody discloses it like that, then I feel like I'm being treated as a professional because I'm giving you permission to touch me and we are in a professional setting. There was none of that in this instance. So I was very uncomfortable with it. I then go try on my Speedos and stuff, and apparently my reaction made him uncomfortable, which,
God forbid.
That's my bad.
Screw him.
Literally. So as I'm leaving this job, call my agent as I'm at the train and I'm like, hey, and my agent at the time was this 26-year-old, loved her. She was great. Called her and I'm like, hey, is this normal? Like, how would you have expected me to react in this situation? She's like, that is absolutely not okay. I'm going to take this up and speak with like our head person. So the head lady calls me the next day, asked me to come into her office. So I have the head lady, the head agent, both in this office, basically scolding me for making this designer feel uncomfortable.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's your issue now.
I remember it being so words to me that I went from like, I didn't know if in the beginning I just wanted to like cry and be like, are you kidding me? Can you imagine if I just came up and touched your bare body parts?
Or like, think about like your daughter or your like
anybody that you care about.
Yeah. What? I have chills. I'm like, I'm ready to go to war right now.
Oh girl. I like the beginning, it was like fighting back tears. And then like halfway through the conversation, it was like the fact that I am defending myself right now when you are representing me so backwards. And I think that from that point on, there was bits and pieces that I was viewed as difficult because I stood my ground there. And I think it messes with your mind in a lot of different ways and like thinking like, am I? Like, should I have just been quiet? And that's really when I realized too that there is no HR for models. There's nobody looking out for these individuals. And then when it kept happening, I knew that modeling was not going to be my end game. And I knew there was a way that I wanted to transition. And I remember standing in another instance where I was there for a casting and she asked me to strip down to my bra and underwear. And typically that's very normal because then they measure you again to see if you, but that's done in a private setting.
Yeah.
She asked me to do that in the middle of the boardroom with all these people there. I was like, I'd prefer to be in a closed setting if you'd like to measure me. Again, treating me like I was difficult. So I go in there, they're measuring me and shouting out my measurements. And I can hear people critiquing out loud, 1/2 inch too big, or thighs too big, waist too small, arm is 1/4 too big.
Oh my God.
Like I wasn't a human.
I was going to say, it sounds like they're literally measuring like a piece of meat at the grocery store.
Exactly. Like there was no... And I try and play devil's advocate in the sense that like I'm sure there was no ill intent, but at the same time there was no humanity there. And I felt something so I'm a big believer in God, whatever you believe in, that overcame my headspace saying you're more than a measurement. And it was like a light bulb clicked.
And that was your moment.
That was my moment. And that's when when I took that, I trademarked more than a measurement. I went all in. And then I realized that you can take more than and put anything after it.
Yeah.
It's more than an influencer. It's more than a mom. It's more than whatever.
Yeah, you're in your business era.
Girl, I'm trying. My goodness, figuring it out as I go. But that's really how it all like kind of came full circle. And I think I'm very appreciative to the modeling industry because it brought me a lot. But at the same time, there's so much that needs to change that I just don't think people realize.
Totally. A culmination of so many lessons and challenges that you faced in life that like brought you now to what you're doing, which is helping advocate for people who are also still in the industry that are like being treated unfairly, which I think is so respectable.
Thank you.
And obviously we were talking about this on your podcast, but there's like so much more to having a platform and followers when you have like a message and meaning and purpose to share with people.
Yeah.
And it's so clear to anyone listening to this podcast, like what like your message is. Purpose in life is to help advocate for those people.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah, of course. Oh my God, why am I going to cry?
I know, I'm like, wait.
It's a period. I don't know. It's the time of the month. But I have a couple more questions about like modeling industry and then we'll kind of like switch gears into what you're doing now. Yeah. So you mentioned that you have this mother agency and they take a percentage of all of these other agencies that you sign to. So talking about being a model from a financial standpoint, well, I don't know if everyone, that might be a broad statement, but I think a lot of people view modeling as this like very lucrative career and it's so glamorous and it's so pretty and like attractive. So what would you say is like the average salary of a model?
You know, it's hard to really pinpoint because I think that there's so many different levels of the modeling industry that I think a lot of people, when they think modeling is glamorous, they look at the Gigi Hadids of the world, Bella Hadid, and the Victoria's Secret models, that if you are a household name, you are making millions of dollars. Yeah, you are doing very well for yourself. If you are not a household name and you are hustling your ass off, it can be a range. I think when I started my first year in New York, I think I made like $40,000.
Okay.
And then when I actually started really being able to like support myself, I was around like the $85,000 mark. And when I signed that contract that I was saying was going to be super lucrative, I would have been 6 figures plus just through that fit modeling. That's not doing print modeling.
Gotcha.
But modeling in general, there's nothing consistent about it.
Yeah.
And I also think that, again, it's all household name stuff. Like if you become a recognizable model, then brands are able to use you on more than just a modeling basis.
Right. More than.
And I think that a lot of people think that modeling is so glamorous, and there's bits and pieces that are. And that's what I always assumed too, is that it was just going to be the most glamorous thing that I could do. And it was always going to be getting your hair and your makeup done and amazing shoots and all of that. But I think just with anything in life, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And I think that the industry favors people that come in with a name. And it's really started to pivot now because we have influencers.
I was just going to ask you what your opinion is on influencers becoming models in lieu of
models,
traditional print models.
For me, love. Okay. I think that that's amazing because I think that influencers have been able to market themselves and build their own portfolio online, and they have a personality behind it. Mm-hmm. Whereas traditionally speaking, models, you don't interact with the client at all. Mm-hmm. They see a spec sheet and your portfolio images. They hire you based on that. And when you are hired, some companies are great and you get to show personality and you get to have fun with them. But a lot of the companies, you are there to be a hanger. You are not there for an opinion. You are not there for any of that. Yeah. And I think now that influencers are really taking ownership of their image, they're able to demand more respect because they don't have their careers riding on a modeling job.
That's so interesting for you to say, because also too, thinking about how like an influencer's image is not their size on a spec sheet. Like their image is their likelihood, is their reputation, is what people know and follow and love them for. Yeah. So if they go to this brand and they're not typically like the size 00 or the curve size, then it doesn't really matter, because I feel like the influencer now has the upper hand of like, well, this is my size. So take it or leave it.
Exactly.
Because like you said, modeling is not like the number one.
So, and the treatment of those, I've been on set with influencers and been hired as a model. The treatment for influencers over the treatment of the model, completely different. Really? And it's gotten to a place now with when you are going out for a casting, you have to write down your Instagram handle and your followers as you're walking into the room. What? And a lot of the times they don't consider you if you don't have thousands of followers anymore.
That's crazy. So how does that your perception of influencers?
You know, I think I'm in a blessed position where so many of the influencers that I personally get influenced by and like and enjoy have become personal friends of mine, especially because they've been on More Than, so I know them. Yeah. So I am empowered by influencers, again, because I think that they are taking charge of their own likelihood and their likeness, that they're able to monetize themselves and they get to have multiple different streams of income. Whereas I think the modeling industry and models that are still going into it, it's almost an outdated model because they no longer are just looking for a pretty face. Yeah. A lot of the way that even marketing is going and the models that you're seeing in the ads that we're all consuming now, they want somebody that has more than just their looks.
More than.
I keep going back to it. See? It's catchy.
Totally.
But I think that now people want stories. People want relatability.
Yeah, totally.
And the modeling industry was built on not having relatability. Oh, yeah. The average girl was not supposed to be able to relate to the girl that was in the commercials and on the magazine covers, because that's how this unrealistic standard of beauty was created. But now it's such a flip side to it, because you have that relatability that is bringing consumers into these brands that they're buying because of who they're hiring from an influencer perspective. So I think that now I'm getting a little smarter about how I want to market myself.
Wait a second, let me become an influencer and you'll never tell me to wear padding again.
Right? I'm like, goodness, if I would have capitalized on this influencer game many, many years ago, then maybe things could be a little different. But I'm glad that I had the hustle model experience because I feel like I can relate to the women that are still doing that. But I also have a newfound respect for the people that are putting themselves out there in that position, because it is hard to do.
Well, hearing from your perspective too, it's interesting because when you see an influencer such as like Addison Rae, or Dixie D'Amelio breaking into the modeling, you don't belong here. And this might be an assumption, but it kind of sounds like the people that are not in the modeling industry are the ones that are telling them that they don't belong in there.
Totally. And I think there's two sides to that, because I do have some friends too that have made it
taking away opportunities from us. Yeah.
And they've made it really well as being a model. And my image, which it's funny, I heard this all the time. When I first started, it was like, you're perfect. You're so commercial. You're the girl next door. Everyone loved a blonde hair, blue-eyed, tan.
Is literally like the
That was
American
so stereotypical. So when
and German.
And German apparently. And so when I first got signed as a model, it's like I was working all the time because that's what people wanted. And even when I went out to New York too, like my look is not desirable for a lot of these companies. And I think once I kind of came to terms with the fact that like I'm not going to be desirable for everybody and like it's just a job, that I started noticing that a lot of my friends that were working really consistently and having these big jobs were getting pissed that these influencers are coming in, getting paid more than them, working less hours than them, and getting treated like a human being. Whereas these models are there for 14 hours on set. We don't get paid for at least 90 days after we do a job. And typically we have to chase down that money. Whereas if an influencer put them on blast real quick, like, hey, this client decided they didn't want to pay me, they get a whole different reach. But for a lot of the working models, they have to fight that game all the time.
Yeah. I will say there's been a lot of parallels as you've been continuing to speak about the modeling industry as there are with the influencer industry, because like your representation is so important and they will only advocate for you like if you are doing your job and if you're still relevant. And it's kind of in a different aspect because your success as an influencer is based on your relevance with your like personality, versus in modeling, it's like your relevance with your image and your age and your size. But there are so many parallels there. And speaking on like the pay kind of challenges to it, there are some like campaigns that I've done that I am just now getting paid for from like last summer. And it's like a year later. And it's like, it looks so glamorous from the outside. And I'm so lucky and so fortunate to be in the position that I'm not like hunting down that money. Like we should be adding on, you know, late fees to it. But if I'm not getting paid that, I'm still going to be able to survive. I'll still be able to pay my rent and pay for my car and all these other expenses. But like, it's not as lucrative as people seem. And there's, you look at like the super high influencers, the people that are racking in like millions and millions, tens of millions. And then like you look at the smaller creators that are doing UGC and like it's so synonymous with the modeling industry too.
Totally.
So I find this all so fascinating. I hope everyone who's listening to the podcast has enjoyed it so far, because this is one of my favorite episodes so far. I say this every time.
Oh, hell yeah.
But like for real.
You know what? I'm taking that and I'm running with it.
Yeah, you should, because this is so valuable to just shed insight, you know, to everyone who listens to this podcast. And it's typically a lot of like younger girls from college age. I mean, there's some high school girlies out there. There are high school girlies listen to podcasts. They're so mature. And then we have like middle-aged women and like also people that are my mom's age. And I mean, women of all ages, I think could really learn something from what you've been sharing. I
think that there's just so much more than meets the eye, that I think that's in every industry, right? Like we're all struggling with stuff behind the scenes that often isn't talked about. And then thankfully, like you and I have a microphone in front of us that we get to talk about our very interesting experiences just because they've been on a scale that maybe most people haven't dived into these industries. But I think the parallels of the feelings is stuff that people can relate to no matter what phase of life that you're in. You know, everyone struggles with confidence and insecurity and trying to figure out where you belong and standing up for yourself and your moral compass. Like, it's something that we all have to navigate.
My like hair is going to grow back because I have goosebumps. I literally shaved this morning. I'm not kidding you. I was like, I know I'm going to wear shorts. Let me shave my legs. And now my leg hair is going to grow back because I got goosebumps.
I'm honored.
That was just so eloquent and so perfectly summarized our conversation so far today. So before we wrap things up, I just have a few more questions. Yeah. So you and I were talking off camera about you're married recently and your husband is so supportive of everything that you've done. And as you've continued to take less modeling jobs recently, how has that affected y'all's relationship from a financial standpoint?
You know, it's been interesting because when we left New York, when we lived together there, we split everything pretty much 50-50 when it came to like our bills, given he always paid for like our vacations and date nights. He's always been very, very, very generous to me in that way. He's been wonderful. But when COVID first happened, I lost a lot of my income that I was really relying on. And thankfully, we were living with my mom in the very beginning of it, but we were still paying our New York City rent. And he's in a sales job, so he has a little bit more steady income and really knows what he can budget for. And I went through a total mind trip because I don't ever want to be taken care of. And I want everything to be done because I made it happen, not because somebody else helped me. And I think that was a big thing for me to even grow and evolve into within my own relationship too, because I think that a true partnership and the person that you spend your life with really becomes a part of you and supporting the things that you're working towards. So when I was still modeling full time when we were engaged, I was doing virtual fit modeling, as fun as that sounds, when we were engaged in Arizona. And then when we moved to Arizona, or to, where do I live now? Texas. I was still, long list. I was still having my own income through modeling there. And I really lost my clients right before the wedding happened in October. And I had been mentally being myself because I knew that would happen eventually when all my clients started going back into the office in New York. And ultimately I live in Texas now. So I knew it would happen, but the idea of diving into more than and trying to create a business based off of what I've saved for modeling and knowing what it's going to look like and how lucrative it's going to be has been a mind trip for me. And it's still something that I'm very much working on. But my husband has been so supportive and so fantastic that he has taken over in what I think is a husband role in every way, shape, and form, and like really provides for our living and everything additional that we need to like successful as a married couple. And anytime I've ever said like I'm investing more money into the business, or I'm trying to grow in this way, or I'm trying to find a coach, or I'm trying to like figure out how I can be lucrative in the long run, he's the first person that is like, do whatever you got to do. Which it is. And given we are very lucky to be in the position that we're in right now. And when we first got together, we were broke off our ass and like had literally nothing to our name. So I feel like knowing that we've grown our wealth together and really grown our life together has allowed me to be more comfortable with the idea of him being a support system, not only verbally, financially. And I think when you let somebody in to that degree, it can be really scary. But now transitioning into like being a whole wife and like enjoying this chapter of my life, it's been really fulfilling to watch him step into the husband role.
Yeah, take care of you.
And take care of me in ways that I never thought I would allow somebody to take care of me. And now start talking about like our next steps when it comes to what I want to do with the business and eventually someday a family and all of these things that I feel like I'm also allowing him space to grow and evolve into that role as well. That I think a lot of women maybe can relate to this in the sense of like not having your own thing or making your own money to the extent that you want to. I wish I was a multimillionaire, and someday that's the plan.
You will be.
That's
Speak it
the plan.
into existence.
And he's like, I would love to be a stay-at-home dad if we want to like aspire for that. And I'm like, we're working on it, but right now you're gonna have to step up a little bit. So he's been great in that aspect. And now it's just like getting into the groove of married life, which has been, married life is so much better than engaged life. Oh my God.
But yeah, I can't imagine. We were talking before this episode about just the cost of weddings, and I'm
Good
like,
God.
oh,
Makes me sick.
yeah, but we talked in your episode that we filmed on your podcast about how confidence kind of comes in ebbs and flows. And it sounds like support from a relationship and a married, relationship kind of also comes in ebbs and flows. Like if I think about my parents, I mean, my mom was cleaning houses. She was working at the YMCA. My dad was like consistent job to make ends meet. And then when my mom decided she wanted to go back to school to be a teacher, like my dad was the one that was supporting us and like helping kind of assist in her dreams and aspirations. And then she started being a teacher, and like being a teacher is not a very lucrative career. And so, yeah, it sounds like you guys have a very healthy relationship where he is super supportive of everything you're doing. And it makes me happy to know that you have people around you that are build you up instead of telling you why you shouldn't focus more time and more money and energy on what you're building. But
totally,
I'm one of those people. I would love to be your support system. So tell all of the girlies that are listening to this podcast all about more than.
All about more than. So it originally started in the sense of I wanted to do these in-person events where we could really build a community that was cultivated online and have it in person. Because for me, I have always been a very, I don't want to say closed off person, because when you get to know me, I'm an open book, but I'm shy when you first meet me. And I think that that can be taken in a lot of different directions. And I always just wanted to find a community that I felt like I could be my authentic self with. And post-college, that's really difficult to do. And that's why I'm so appreciative of what you're doing, because it's like you are bringing these people together in such incredible ways. But when I was in New York, I was meeting all these people through modeling and through these events that I would go to by myself, meet girlfriends, and like it was great. So I wanted to be able to bring those experiences to other cities. And so that's ultimately what the idea for More Than was in the very beginning. And then when the pandemic hit, it was like, well, podcast. We're going to figure out how the
we can't do it in person.
We
Let's
set
put it
up a
on.
podcast. So I like Googled how do you start a podcast and like learned audio from like a 14-year-old boy that apparently knows everything about audio and just taught myself. So as of now, we have the I Am More Than podcast. We're 4 seasons in. We have, over 60 episodes with so many different incredible women. And my goal is really to create a safe space for women to share their personal journeys when it comes to topics that can be viewed as taboo. So I'm very passionate about mental health and confidence and body image. Those are 3 things that I've really struggled with throughout my 20s. And I feel like I'm in a place now that it's such a normal conversation to me, but it's not to a lot of other people. Yeah. And I think that it can help the people that are struggling and feel isolated to not feel so alone. So that's really what we try and highlight on the podcast. And eventually I'd like for it to become something where we can have these meetups in person that are themed around confidence and mental health and helping people build that foundation. Because I really do think that when you take hold of your confidence, every other aspect of your life opens up. Mm-hmm. So my goal through More Than too is eventually to become a confidence coach so I can help women really build these fundamentals and ultimately change their life and help it just translate.
It's not your goal. You will be a confidence coach.
You heard it here.
You will be a confidence coach. You will be a multimillionaire, speaking all of these things into existence for you. Okay, so as we wrap things up, tell everyone where they can find you and follow you and listen.
So you can find me at JordWess, JordWess, and More Than is at More Than Inc. You can find us on our website, morethaninc.com, and come hang out.
That's everything. Well, you guys go follow Jordan, one of my new good friends here in Austin, and keep an eye out for all of the events she's planning and her new podcast. And go and listen to the podcast that we recorded before this. I have an episode on her podcast, which is so fun, being on the opposite side of the chair. So thank you again so much for being my guest this week.
I loved it. Loved every second.
Same. We're talking about how we need to record like 2 or 3 more.
Right?
So
I'm like, let's just keep it going.
We might have a bonus episode next week. Who knows? We'll find out. But that's all for today. Thank you guys. And I'll talk to you next Tuesday. Bye.